credits, baby. Let's go. We did it. Okay. All right, let's see. First things first, the bottom center of the screen says that we've beaten 25 games in 2024 and 472 since we started doing this in 2020. Those numbers are false. We've now beaten 26 games in 2024 and 473 since we started doing this in 2020. Let's go. All right. Here's the deal with this game. The general idea of this whole game, my general takeaway, is that it has a lot of really interesting, unique things going for it that give it value. And it's got a lot of just several issues that could easily have been fixed that really drag it down. So let's start with the good stuff. While this game is a turn-based tactical RPG, technically, its main focus is really on narrative, atmosphere, music, art design, ambiance. The combat calling it tactical is a stretch. It's very simple. So when it comes to the technical parts, like the art direction parts, like the music is awesome. The music is great. Like, I'm going to download this on Spotify later. The music is great. The art direction, although it obviously was less expensive than a AAA affair, it did not look cheap, which is, something that some good indie games are good at and some aren't. The art direction looked really cool. It fit for what the story was about and what the game was about and what we were doing. The art direction was a little minimalist, but it worked. And the combat, especially later on in the game, did get a little bit more complex and complicated. And so the best parts of the game were for me, my favorite parts were the later fights in the game, because the very beginning, it's pretty straightforward. But as the game goes on, it starts to add a little bit more complexity at a time, gradually. And then by the end, it's like, yeah, okay, these fights are actually involved enough to be really fun. So the later fights I really liked. I thought the story was cool. And again, that I kind of roped that in with the art direction. Like, it worked. The story worked with the way that the game looked and sounded and felt. It felt, even though it was technically a turn-based tactical RPG, this really plays more like a narrative adventure. It scratches that itch, and so if you don't like narrative adventures, it's going to be, I would not recommend this game to someone that's like really hardcore into tactical RPGs. That's not really what this game is for, even though that's technically what it is. I would recommend this to someone who likes narrative indie games and likes games with a strong message, and it had that, and I liked that. So all in all, I did enjoy all that stuff about it. Now let's talk about some of the problems. This is a port from a mobile game. And really, as far as like the first thing that comes to mind that could be an issue there is like, oh, how is it graphically? How does it perform? Does it feel like a mobile game? No, not really. They did it's a really well-made game. So it doesn't really feel like a mobile. I guess it's Netflix. So I don't know. They're doing their own thing. But it didn't feel that way to me. It didn't feel like a mobile game. It felt like a regular game. But the way that they ported it, there were a bunch of issues. The way that the UI, I'm sure they made some changes, but the UI is bad. Like, they didn't. There's a bunch of things that you would have in a regular game that this game just didn't think to add. Like, for instance, in the inventory screen, there's usually a button or some pictures that say push right button and left button to scroll through these. Push X to scroll through these. None of that was there because it was originally designed that you just touch everything. And so they just didn't put any of those indicators in there. They don't ever tell you how to do it. You just have to push buttons until you figure out what does what, and it's not intuitive at all. And so I never really had it down the whole game. Even late in the game when I'm switching inventory around, which you don't have to do that much in this game, but occasionally it came up. I was like, okay, does this button do it? Nope. Does this button do it? Nope. Does this button do it? Nope. That does that other thing that I don't want. Okay, this button. Okay, this button does it. There's a lot of that. And it was been very simple to just add in those prompts or put in some kind of tutorial or both. So that was really bad. Also, the way that the traversal worked on the tactical grid in combat didn't make any sense. There would be times that a character could walk backwards 3 steps but only forward 1, and the game never gave you any indication as to why. It didn't seem to be because of topography. It didn't seem to be because of enemies being in the way. The way I never knew how far my character could go until I highlighted them and it just showed on the map. And sometimes it would show they could go to places on the map, but then when you click on it, just wouldn't do it. Let's get into that, actually. This game has bugs galore. I mean, I've seen worse, but there are a lot of issues like I would click on something and it just wouldn't go. It just wouldn't do. Even though it was highlighted as a place you could move to, it just wouldn't let you. You would do damage to someone and it wouldn't take it off of their health bar until like 2 turns later. That happened a lot. It would there were problems with the interface would say that you could do something like use a skill, and then you would use it and it just wouldn't go. Like the button just wouldn't work. There was a lot of that, and I really, really got frustrated with it toward the end when the fights were starting to get a little bit hard. This game isn't hard, really, but toward the end, so there were a couple of more challenging fights, and it's like, dude, I just spent my whole 4 teammates' turns on the premise that I should be able to move to this spot, which I definitely should be able to, and then you're just not going to let me move there, and so my whole turn is basically screwed. I restarted battles a couple of times because of that, and I never figured out why. Sometimes I think that there is some logic that I'm not understanding, but it should have been explained at some point. There's no tutorial in this game. At any point do they really explain anything. I think there might have been like X to go forward, right trigger to go forward, or stuff like that with the boat. But outside of that, there wasn't any tutorial stuff. They needed more tutorial stuff. There was several bugs. The boat traversal controls were horrible. They were horrible. It's not just like the boat was unwieldy, because that could have been deliberate. It was like the camera was backwards. You go left and the camera goes right. As it was like X-axis was inverted, but there was no option in the menu to change that. And so the whole time you just have to get used to X being inverted when you're driving the boat, which I've never played a game that way. I don't know a lot of people that have. Why the hell would it be like that? And B, why the hell wouldn't you be able to have the option if you are going to do it like that? Also, when you're driving the boat, if you point the camera anywhere other than straight ahead, which you are going to want to do in this game because it's a beautiful game and you want to look around. You want to look to the left and the right at the flooded buildings and trees and mountains and monuments, and there's a beautiful stuff in this game. So you want to look around when you're in the boat. But if you don't put your hands on the analog stick, it just snaps back to forward. So the only way you can look to the left while you're driving the boat is you have to edge it over and then wait for it to come back and edge it over. Like you can't sit still. It's horrible. It's horrible. It's very clearly designed where if you want to look around, like you can hold your finger down, and while you're holding it, maybe it stays static. But that doesn't transfer to fucking analog sticks. They needed to change it. It was really frustrating. And then, as far as the combat, I would have appreciated more RPG stuff. I get that this is kind of like a bare bones kind of game. It's very straightforward. It's not trying to do a whole lot. But because there weren't levels, skill points, skill trees, more weapons, loot kind of things, there wasn't really a lot to get engaged in with the combat. It was just do your best in the battle, and then when you win, great, you've got that done. You can move on to the next fight. But it's not like, oh, I want to make sure I take out all these enemies on these optional islands because I'll be higher level or I'll get more loot. No. If you're going to do the optional stuff, which there are a few optional fights in this game, you're just doing it for fun. There's really there's no other reason to do it. And so that, like, for me, I'm just like, well, I'm not going to do extra fights for nothing. So it was very bare bones as far as like your equipment and and that was another thing that I didn't like. The way that the equipment worked, there were items that, like, you pick up a crowbar and it's like, okay, these 2 characters can use this crowbar. Why? Don't worry about why. It's just these 2 enemies can use this crowbar. That's one thing. That's fine. I mean, a lot of games do that, right? It's not great, but it's whatever. But then you pick up 4 more weapons over the course of the game, and that's about it, really. You pick up like just a few weapons over the course of the whole game, and they can all only be used by 2 characters. So I've got 1 character that can use 5 different weapons, and they're all the best weapons. And then I've got this other character over here that can use weapons, because some of them can't. They're like monk style. They don't use weapons or whatever. They've got their own. But then I've got this other guy who could use weapons, but he can't use any of the really good ones. He can use the oar and the fishing reel, and that's about it, you know. It's like, then why did you give me 4 different weapons for this one character when it's very clear that the 2 that he has equipped are the best there's going to be, you know? So it's like I picked up a hatchet or something toward the end. And it was it was like one of the last weapons I picked up, and it was pretty good, but it wasn't quite as good as what the only guy that could use it already had. So it was kind of pointless. So I realized that the point of this game isn't mainly like loot grind or whatever, but like if you're going to put equipment in your game, like, you know, make it fun, maybe. I don't know. So overall, the deal with this game is that it's pretty bare bones. It's very UI frustrating. The UI is rough. But behind all that, it does have a very touching story. It's got a very interesting ambiance, like tone to it that is pretty genuinely cool and unique. The music is awesome. And the way that it looks and feels is cool. It's just that the controls kind of suck, the UI kind of sucks, and the combat isn't that rewarding, really. In other words, if you're going to play that, like, that's why I said at the beginning, I would only recommend this game to people that enjoy narrative experiences, that don't mind a little turn-based combat. If you're really into turn-based combat, there are better games for you to play, especially if you're not that into narrative games. But it was okay. It was okay. I'm glad I played it. It was worth the $16 I think I spent on it. It was worth that. Barely. But it was worth it. All right, we did it. That's it. So, last order of business. Highwater, it's been fun. But we are now going to delete you from our console and never play you again. Bye, Highwater. Thank you. Bye.